BRICS. You know, the BRIC states, there are like 6 of them, and they were trying to destroy our dollar. They were going to say, you know, they wanted to create a new currency. They probably wanted to use the yuan, China. They wanted to use the yuan. And Biden said, well, this is a tough situation. There's not much we can do about that. We can't help that. I said, oh, we can help it. So when I came in, the first thing I said is any BRIC state that even mentions the destruction of the dollar will be charged a 150% tariff. And we don't want your goods. We don't want to partake. And the BRIC states just broke up. I don't know what the hell happened to them. We haven't heard from the BRIC states lately. But he said that wasn't much we could do about it. There was a lot. It took once, and literally, they said, sir, what about the BRIC states? They're going to take over the dollar, the sanctity of the dollar. They're going to create a new currency to rule the world. I said, no, they're not. They said, yes, they are, sir. They said it. I said, no, they're not.
I was struck by that speech of Mr. Trump's as well, because it's such a wonderful example, not that we need many more, of when he is talking right through his, I don't know what, and I'm going to be polite, and just making it up as he goes. The BRICS have broken up. There's not the slightest shred of evidence to suggest it. There are 2 kinds of BRIC membership, full partnership, and then a second category that's a little less. But it's the idea that you're in there for a while and then you'll be lifted up to the full partnership. A full partnership countries, I believe, now number, it's either 9 or 11, and then the other one is either the 11 or the 9. But you put them all together, and that's what you should be doing. It's over 20 countries. So we're not talking 5 or 6, even if he leaves out that those countries, 21, 22, whatever they are right now. Here's a little detail about them, Mr. Trump. They include a majority of the people on this planet. They are the leaders of the majority of people, somewhere between 50 and 60% of the world's population lives in BRICS countries. You know what the percentage of the world's population is that lives in the United States? 4.5%, Mr. Trump. You are a mouse. They are an elephant in terms of population. But wait a minute. That's not the same as economic power. You're right. So let's take a look at that. The United States and its 6 fellow members of the world leader used to be called the G7, the group of 7. When you add up all the total output of goods and services of the United States and the 6 others, and the 6 others, by the way, Canada, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, and Britain. When you put all that together, about 28, maybe 29% of the world's output. You put together the GDP, the gross output of goods and services of the BRICS today. Ready? It's about 38%. It's not even close anymore. The BRICS are a richer block of countries than the United States and its allies are. In other words, what we got used to in the second half of the 20th century, U.S. dominance, isn't there anymore, Mr. Trump. And you know, I'm convinced that what he is doing is a performance even he understands. Yeah, he bloviates and says this nonsense about the BRICS being gone and how Biden was weak and he is strong, an endless repetition that he seems to enjoy each and every time. But this is a fantasy, and somewhere he knows it. Why do I say that? Because he looks at America and says correctly, it's in decline. Oh, he uses blustery words. They don't respect us anymore, or they're laughing at us anymore. Yeah, he has his way of doing it, and he's going to fix it all by putting America first. But forget all that for a moment and just recognize with me that he understands it's in trouble. He's going to blame it all on Mr. Biden. That's cheap politics. he knows that he was as responsible in his time as Mr. Biden was in his, or if he doesn't know it, he should. But now here comes the punchline. Somewhere he understands, and the people around him do too, that the United States lost the war in Vietnam back in the 1970s. They lost the war much later in Afghanistan. Vietnam is run by the North Vietnamese Communist Party and its associates. They were the enemy in 1975. Afghanistan is ruled by the Taliban. They were the enemy when the United States invaded there. We have lost the war in Ukraine. We certainly didn't win the one in Iraq. Wow. The trajectory isn't good. For all of those wars, we dared not, as a nation, tax our people because the opposition to the war would have gone through the roof if Americans had to pay for it, not just with young men and women dying, and not just with all the wasted resources, but with a tax bill on top of it. So they were paid for by printing money, borrowing and printing money. And so now our deficit as a country has gone through the roof, in excess of $1 trillion a year. Our debts as a nation far ahead of our total output of goods and services. So they knew something had to be done. And here again, Mr. Trump was willing to go much further. He took a step back, looked at Europe, looked at the BRICS, looked at the fact that the BRICS are what saved Russia in this war. You want to know why Russia won the war in Ukraine? It's not just that the Russians have a good army. Clearly they do. But it's that they were able to survive the one thing the United States and Europe had to throw at them: the sanctions, the threat of not buying oil and gas from Russia, which turned around and sold it to their BRICS allies. There's the power of BRICS for you. That's why you've lost in Ukraine. And Mr. Trump, give him the credit he deserves, Mr. Trump got it. And he said, we need a change. We are allied with the Europeans against the Russians with their allies, China and India. That means we are, to be blunt, betting on the wrong horse. And he's dropping Canada, Mexico, and Europe, and he's switching, going to try to build a relationship with Russia. None of this may work. Nothing he is doing, and that includes laying off government workers. There's no guarantee these things will work. Not at all. The resistance to them is everywhere. It's happening across this country against the firings, and it's happening in Europe and Canada and Mexico, who don't want to be thrust aside as the United States approaches Russia. The only people who must be smiling as they sip their vodka are the Russians, as they watch the disintegration of their adversary, because this disintegration is provoked by Mr. Trump, who, again, to give him the credit he deserves, understands something has to change, because the trajectory we were on was like being on a train heading full speed into a stone wall. Somebody has to jump up there, do something. Mr. Trump is making his effort very conventional, very much designed to help the employer class, the rich and the corporations, as Republicans always do. But to do it with much more gusto, much more theatric. It's a long shot, but he understands time is running out. That's real. I think you're exactly right, Danny, that to bring that up. Let me put it in a slightly different way, but it's an agreement with you. Whatever the intents of Mr. Trump, whatever part of this he understands, and most of it I don't think he could put together in a coherent sentence, given his difficulties doing that anyway. It's inevitable. That's right. In a world divided among countries, you're going to see tensions arise, for example, between Russia and China over a variety of issues. Why do I say that? Because that's what history shows us. It's also what the history of those two countries. They have come to blows. In the 1960s, there were military conflicts between Russia and China. So it's not as though this has never happened or hasn't happened for a long time. Tensions will arise, and the United States, to save itself, will be doing everything possible to enhance those divisions, to worsen them, to aggravate them, to invent them if they're not there, to impose them if they have a power. But for the same reason, neither the Russians nor the Chinese show any hesitance to say these days that their alliance is strong and their alliance is something they are committed to. I mean, look at the historic meaning when Mr. Putin gets up some months or maybe a couple years ago now and basically says, we are no longer focused on being European. We are focused to the East. We are an Asian power. We are not a European power. Wow. For the leader of a country to reorient itself that way is taking a very serious step, especially in a multi-ethnic, multicultural universe such as the Russians occupy on the face of this earth. So this is very, very crucial. There will be tensions. There will be new configurations. I think in American foreign policy now, there is a hope on the part of the Trump people. They have to think this, given what they're doing, that they can somehow transform the enmity that used to exist between the United States and Russia into an alliance. And they are prepared to pay the price of a destroyed alliance with Western Europe. The Western European politicians, who are mostly people who have followed the United States from their childhood as individuals, they've been nothing but pro-American politicians all of their lives. Try to understand, they are being hung out to dry. The United States is abandoning them. The Macrons, the Starmers, the Schultzes, all of them. They are left on their own with a very weak economy. I mean, the single most important economy in Western Europe for decades has been Germany. Germany is now the most backward in terms of economic development. They are in a recession. They have been now for a couple of years, and it looks like they're going to continue. That means they're not growing, they're shrinking as an economic source. Why? Because they used to get cheap energy from Russia, giving them an advantage, and they were the big exporter of machinery to China, giving them an advantage. China doesn't need it, and Russians have found other customers for their cheap oil, leaving Germany wiped out. And the United States is at this worst moment in Europe when they need help from the United States, telling them, oh no, we're not helping you. You've got to spend more on defense. Let me tell you something. If the Europeans actually try now, in their destroyed circumstances, to spend more on defense without the help of the United States, the only way they can afford that is by cutting back on their social programs, taking the money that they used to provide to give everybody health care, which they do, to give most university students no tuition, which they do, to go on and on and on. They're going to take all that back from the people in order to have a big military, which is always going to be way behind what Russia and China and their own people won't stand for it. So those politicians are looking at terrible choices, all of which carry immense risks. And why? Because the United States is trying to save itself as it declines and jettisoning the clapboards, throwing away the allies because they need to squeeze more out of them, all under the label of America First. We are watching a disintegrating empire. And as a great writer once said, beware of living in interesting times because the road can get very rocky. We are on a rocky road, and no assurances of Mr. Trump about how the bricks are broken and they're gone is all hand waving. It's all fantasy, but it's part of a denial. And denial has never been a really good idea as a way to solve your problem. It's a real choice, and it's the same kind of choice that the United States faces vis-a-vis China. It also, in a way, faces a comparable choice in its relationship with Europe or its allies or the global South. You either are going to try to hold on to your dominance, and by that I mean not just your military strength, but your political influence, your economic wealth, your ideological leadership. You're either going to try to hold on to that dominance by denying that it's under real threat, or you're going to face it. And if you face it, then the only option is to sit down with whoever else is involved, the Chinese, the Europeans, the global South, and try to work out a global architecture, because they're using that word out in Europe a lot, a European security architecture. You have to work out how we're going to live together on this planet. Mr. Trump is everywhere, hitting this one with a tariff, hitting that one with a tariff, with a trade war, taking the canal back, snatching. Look at this behavior. Take a step back, just as a reasonable person. This is a bully. This is an attempt to bully your way through. It's too late for that in this world. It's too late for anyone, but certainly the United States, to do it. It's just not facing what it has become. Look, the United States has tried to slow down Chinese growth so they stop overtaking us, as they have on domain after domain. It hasn't worked. The IMF tells us that in 2024, the year just passed, the United States grew at about 2.7%. The rest of the G7 grew slower than that. As I told you, Germany is actually growing negative. It's shrinking. What did the IMF, a Western institution, what did they tell us about Chinese growth in the year just passed? Answer, 5%. That's nearly double the rate of growth of the United States. In India, it was 7%, nearly triple. I mean, the gap between them is getting worse with each passing month. The United States has to come to terms with this, the bullying, the brandishing, whether it's the Seventh Fleet in the South China Sea, etc., or it's Ukraine. You can't do it. You can't do it. So you might as well come forward. And here's my guess. You're going to see the other side of the political spectrum figure this out. And you're going to get a Bernie or someone like that to come forward in America and say, we had the effort by the right wing to figure out how to save the decline of this empire. It didn't work. Now let's try a different approach. in a way, that's what Trump did and got his chance. He's trying to pull it off. I don't think he will. And that will create the space for a real alternative that will propose sitting down. And it will strike Americans as charmingly strange or weird as Mr. Trump saying, war in Ukraine over, I'm sitting down with that so-called monster, Mr. Putin, and I'm going to trust him, and we're going to work out a deal. What? And now everybody's realizing, well, that's the next phase. And after all the mouth foaming, we'll all get used to it, won't we? Because that's what Americans do.